Hello. So this lecture is on René Descartes. He was one of the early modern philosophers, and let's find out more about him. So who was René Descartes? Well, he was French. He was the son of well-to-do parents. His mother died when he was very young. And his father died when he was a child. He was left inheritances by them so that he never had to work. But he pursued an active life of scientific and philosophical research. He was in the post-Protestant Reformation period, where the Catholic Church had just been dealt a blow and the Protestant Church was a rival power. He was in the post-Copernican revolution period. The Ptolemaic model of Earth at the center of the universe had been overturned by or recentered by Copernicus, who posited a heliocentric model with the sun at the center of things. And church authority was being questioned, and at the same time, the church was cracking down on the scientists who were doing the questioning. One claim to fame is he's credited as the first philosopher to study the nature of consciousness. He was a rationalist. The book likes to use the word archetype. So he was an archetypal rationalist, um, kind of a pure form of one, as rationalist as you can get. And he tried to rely solely upon reason and so-called innate ideas or a priori. Some people say a priori. I think a priori is more faithful to the restored high classical pronunciation of Latin. But anyway, it's not that important how you say it. Um, So the next philosopher we'll look at, David Hume, was an empiricist, and both Descartes and Hume were skeptics of a sort, and whereas Descartes tried to use reason for all knowledge, arriving at all knowledge, Hume tried to use empirical observation of the world to as a basis of knowledge. So we'll see that next. So I've talked about rationalism. It doesn't depend upon the world, and in fact, the so-called external world was a problem for Descartes because he found his thinking thing, which he said he was, and then there was a world separate from it, out there somewhere, but its existence was doubtful until he finished his meditations and satisfied himself that he had proven the existence of the external world. Um, so even though Descartes would seem to be against talking about the external world and doubting its existence. He was a scientist who did research, and he was inspired by advanced mathematics and new scientific discoveries, some of which he carried out himself, um, that went against Aristotelianism. And so Aristotelianism was dominant and it was being challenged. And he was someone who wanted to challenge it. He didn't accept authority. He wanted to know things for himself. So one thing he did that led to his famous meditations and his I think, therefore I am, is he tried to doubt everything that could be doubted. And then he hoped he would arrive at an undoubtable or indubitable foundational truth upon which he could base a philosophy. This is the method of systematic doubt, systematically doubting everything you can, and skepticism of the external world and of knowledge. Um, describes Descartes' philosophy as well, at least this methodological skepticism. A side note on Descartes is that a philosopher of culture, Susan Bordeaux, says that with Descartes, Descartes was huge on objectivity. Um, which has been called the view from nowhere, by people who don't believe you can achieve the kind of absolute objectivity that Descartes thought was necessary for knowledge. So, she says that he uh, replaces meaning with objectivity as the chief issue for philosophy. So, replaces meaning with objectivity. Yes, okay. Um, so previous philosophers wondered what the good life was. They wondered what the meaning of life was. And for Descartes, he wanted to know what you could know, um, which is epistemological uh, philosophizing. And Bordeaux says that the Cartesian rationalism and attempts at objectivity are masculine and they repress feminine ways of thinking and being. So Bordeaux says that a woman's everyday life involves an embodied existence with all kinds of physical activity going on and bodily activity going on, which is the reverse of Descartes' soul and a body or the thing. I mean, he calls himself, he says, I am a thinking thing. Um, all he does is think, and then later he has more to say about like feeling pain when the body is hurt. So there's some connection there somehow. Um, through the pineal gland, Descartes thought. Anyway, um, Descartes, his meditation was predated and influenced by some other philosophers. The Persian philosopher Abu Hamid Muhammad al-Ghazali, sorry, his thought anticipates Descartes' first meditation, the one where he declares what he's going to doubt, by 500 years. And to read the translation of um, al-Ghazali, which is in the textbook, um, I never read him, um, is seems very modern, perhaps because of the similarity to Descartes' philosophizing. So here it is, cogito ergo sum, Latin for I think, therefore I am. So I'm thinking right now, and I'm sitting here reading this lecture, and since I'm thinking I must exist, because the unstated premise being, um, uh, thought can only be done by something that exists. And so I think, and therefore I am. So Descartes said the statement, I am, I exist, by itself was necessarily true every time it was declared. So it was declared, and the circumstances in which it was declared didn't matter. It was necessarily true. Um, because if somebody says, "Well, you're wrong, Descartes," he says, "Well, I think actually it was Aquinas or Augustine, who made an argument like this. You know, I may be wrong, but I'm still right that I exist." So, a philosophical approach that attempts to establish indubitable foundational claims of truth, the way Descartes did, with his systematic doubt and his attempt to arrive at something that could not be doubted, is called foundationalism. And so that's building up from maybe a few truths, or in Descartes' case, seemingly only one truth, and using that to build a philosophical structure. The book has a lot more to say about Descartes. Um, he was certainly an influential philosopher, and people who never heard of him and who've never heard of Cartesian dualism, well, Descartes thought there was a thinking thing and then there was a physical thing. So that's two kinds of thing. The way Plato thought there was matter, and then in another world there were forms. That's dualism. Um, so Cartesian dualism is the source of what the so-called mind-body problem. And it's what is the relation of the mind to the body? And it's a question that a great many people like to try to deal with in many different ways. And I'm not talking just about philosophers. I'm talking about people in their everyday lives. You know, when you point to your head and say, I know it, that's that's very much a modern Descartes influenced thing to say, um, because we have the mind, and it's typically thought to be in the brain or in the head, where it acts through the brain and is influenced through the brain, or whatever relation is decided upon. So, what do you think about Cartesian dualism? It's something that is impossible to escape today in Western cultures. It's everywhere. Um, um, Let me see. Uh, some people try to solve the mind-body problem by saying everything is matter. And these are materialists like Karl Marx and many contemporary philosophers. And then other people like George Berkeley. It's spelled Berkeley, but he was Irish and it said Barkley. Um, George Berkeley was an absolute idealist, and he believed that everything was an idea in the mind of God. And so, in answer to the question, well, does my guitar exist? I I do play guitar too, a little bit, very rarely. Does my guitar exist when I'm not in the room? If it's just in my mind? And his answer was uh yes, because God is thinking about it. So those are two different ways of trying to solve the mind-body problem, which really stems from Descartes. Uh, you've got the everything is mind, and you've got the everything is body. Just as you have the rationalist empiricist split, where all knowledge comes from within, and then all knowledge comes from without for the empiricists. So, that's all for right now. I enjoyed this, and I hope that you enjoy reading about Descartes.